So here's my story. I have a strong family history of breast cancer. Both my grandmothers had it. Both my aunts, my maternal aunt and my paternal aunt had it. And last June 2016, my mom also had it. So I have always had breast cancer as a big part of my family story, and it's always been something that scared me. My Aunt Lois was my big scary story, because everyone else survived, and my Aunt Lois died. And she was diagnosed when she was 39. All of my other relatives were diagnosed later. My Aunt Maggie was the only one that was premenopausal. And that was 17 years ago. So there's another good example of a survival. She had two types of breast cancer and 17-year survivor. So that is encouraging for sure. But my Aunt Lois was very young. And I have because I have a family history, I also have a lot of anxiety. I'm very careful with my body, and I genuinely know what is going on with it. And I think that prior to my experience, people might have called me paranoid or a hypochondriac, but I felt something strange in my breast in March, and it wasn't a lump. It just felt different. And I'm Jewish. I have very dense breasts, and I can't really describe what it felt like physically, but it felt inside. I had like an aching feeling and a feeling of milk being let down. So I went to my OBGYN within 2 days, and she did a breast exam and didn't feel anything. But I asked her if I could get into any early screenings because of my family history. And I had asked this before, and I guess the policy had changed because there were so many false positives with mammograms that they weren't giving them super young unless you had like a first degree relative, as in like your own mother had it. So I asked again after having asked many times. And I said, my mom was diagnosed, does that change anything? And she said, she's postmenopausal, but maybe, let me find out. I should pause here and mention that my healthcare provider is Kaiser Permanente, and I'm so grateful for them because they have a program called a high-risk breast clinic, and that was what I was put into. That gave me free genetic testing. Kaiser paid for the whole thing. I think they tested like 81 or 181 or some really large number of genes to see if I had any that led to breast cancer, and I came back completely negative. But they still calculated me at a 25% risk of developing breast cancer in my lifetime. So they put me into this breast clinic, which basically meant that I had access to an entire team of people who would be monitoring my early screenings. And the first part of this was meeting with a top-notch breast surgeon in San Francisco. Her name was Dr. Langer. And so I had an appointment with her, and she went over all the different diagnostics that they can do, and how much research has come along to help treat breast cancer, and what they're really finding is that early detection saves lives. I already knew that, which is why I was there, because I wanted the early screenings. So I had her do a breast exam, and I think by this point it was early June, and she said that she didn't feel anything odd either, but that breast exams are really difficult because if you don't know what somebody's breast feels like generally, it's kind of hard to distinguish different lumps, and I didn't have a lump. It just felt different to me. The breast surgeon recommended that I get on a regimen of yearly screenings. So it would start with a baseline breast MRI, and then it would be a baseline mammogram, and then it would wait, and then somehow every 6 months I was going to get screened. So the first thing that they had me signed up for on the exact same day actually was a breast MRI and a mammogram. And because of some scheduling issues, the mammogram got rescheduled. So a week after I met with Dr. Langer, I was in the MRI machine, which I actually, my mom told me it was no big deal, and I completely freaked out. I learned that day that I have a little bit of a problem with claustrophobia, and I thought I wasn't going to make it through the MRI because it's a 45-minute thing where they stick you actually like in a tube. If you have any claustrophobia issues and you haven't had this done yet, I would recommend asking for an Ativan. But I survived it, and was later told that my scan was perfect. I didn't move at all, which I took as a very big compliment, considering how terrified I was. There's just a weird feeling about being in a tube. So anyway, a week after talking with Dr. Langer, I had had my baseline MRI, and that was on a Monday, or Friday. It was on Friday. I don't know that this really matters, but I'm giving you every detail, I guess. So it was on a Friday, and on Monday, Dr. Langer personally called me and told me that they'd seen something funny on the MRI. And when I had met with her earlier, she'd explained that this is part of the reason why they aren't doing as many screenings for women who don't have an acute family history, is because it causes a lot of stress when there are false positives, and there tend to be a lot of false positives. So I wasn't really super worried. I guess I just thought, I tried to talk myself out of being worried and told myself I was being paranoid and that it was nothing. And so I went in on that Friday and had my first mammogram. And what I remember from that is, because I had such large breasts, it did not hurt. It was not uncomfortable. And the mammogram tech was like really nice and funny, and I liked her a lot. And so after I was finished with the mammogram, I went and sat and waited for the ultrasound, and it took a really long time, and usually Kaiser's really fast, and I remember thinking, like, I'm feeling really anxious right now. I wonder what's taking so long. I wish they would hurry up. And one of the sonogram techs came out. I realize now that the reason why she explained this to me the way that she did was to keep me from getting anxious in the room when I saw how many people were in there. But she basically said that I was going to get 3 people. I was going to get her. I was going to get the head of the sonogram. This is how I remember her saying it. And I was going to get the radiologist, who was the person who actually read the ultrasound. And I realize now that the way that she put that made it sound like she was training or something, and she clearly was not training. I think she'd probably been there for a very long time, and they already knew something was wrong. So Dr. Langer had told me that they would be able to tell me at that time whether or not I was going to need a biopsy. And so when I was on the table and they did the ultrasound, I don't think that they didn't see, I didn't get the vibe that they were concerned. They were seeing something, but I didn't know enough about breast cancer to understand what they were saying. They were saying that they were seeing microcalcifications in places. So I didn't really know that anything was wrong. I just thought they were training. So then after a little while, the radiologist came in, and he looked concerned. I thought he had kind of a weird bedside manner. Nothing was processing. I wasn't thinking, oh, something is wrong. He was very quiet and very intently looking at the screen, and I said, Dr. Langer said that you would be able to tell me whether or not I need a biopsy or not, and, you'd be able to tell me that today. And he said, yes, but he sounded kind of distracted. And I said, okay, will you let me know when you know? And he said, I already know. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, you're going to need a biopsy. and all of a sudden I started shaking. This was 4 p.m. on a Friday. I was, for all intents and purposes, completely alone and going to be completely alone. And I was terrified. Like, why do I need a biopsy? I am 34. And so, long story short, I asked him what was going on, and he asked me if I wanted him to be frank, and I said, yes, I do, please. He told me, you have cancer. There is no other explanation for what we are seeing on these images, but what we need is a biopsy to confirm that it actually is cancer. And I started crying. I said to him, this isn't part of my plan. And he said, cancer is not part of anyone's plan. And I thought, no, you don't understand. Like, it's really not part of my plan. I am 34 years old. I am a single mother to a 6-year-old. I finally found a partner that I love and who I respect and who respects me, and we are blending our families together. Like, that is not an easy job, and I've had a really hard decade, and I'm not supposed to have cancer on top of all of it. Like, I'm just not supposed to. So, I get that it's not part of anyone's plan, but it's really not part of mine. And he was really, really kind to me. I was crying, and I asked him to contact my parents. I called my parents on my phone, and I asked him to talk to them and explain what was going on, because at that point I was completely unable to process anything. So he very kindly explained to my parents on the phone exactly what was going on. And then over the course of the weekend, I had to call my parents probably 4 or 5 times, because I had genuinely convinced myself that I had misheard and I did not actually have cancer, and that there was no way that this was possible. So that was my diagnosis, part 1.